Rockstar Games. They have been one of my favorite studios for quite a while. Being a player of GTA 2 as a youngin' on console, of which I still own all of my dual disc sets of, including the rest of the franchise as well. Shout out to my uncle. Besides just GTA though, LA Noire, as many can probably guess, alongside Max Payne 3, were also favorites of mine too. Regardless, I have always had a suspicion of Rockstar as a company despite being a fan, from the same place I felt about Blizzard as well, before all the controversy about them came out. There have been rumblings about Rockstar for a while. Echoes of crunch work environment that entices prospective employees by promising eventual profit share, and besides such a pristine public image that we all kind of knew them for, perhaps a darker one existing behind the scenes. And then MindsEye happened, and suddenly a wave of information, news stories, and even crazier rumors would come out concerning Rockstar and some of their ex-staff, who would depart in a not-so-ceremonious way and go on to form Build a Rocket Boy, the studio behind MindsEye, and, well, something that was set to be so much more. Leslie Benzies, one of the major execs and developers who departed Rockstar Games, was often credited for being one of the most important creative and managerial executives in their history. Credited with large amounts of their success from GTA 3 through GTA 4, having been the president and main producer of the series. And when the Scottish video game developer announced his new company and vision, he was able to summon a large company, an incredible amount of support, on the strength of his name and reputation alone. But what we would eventually know as MindsEye, which happened June 2025, was not what was originally promised, and was set to be a part of something closer to a large metaverse or even a virtual world. And what we got was MindsEye, an incomplete shooter that had little promise and more so felt like an inflated and rushed mess, failing to wow critics and players alike. But the story hasn't ended there. With an open feud including over 90 of their original developers, Build a Rocket Boy hasn't dissolved yet, despite major layoffs and restructurings totaling at over 200 employees, and then promises of still yet more stuff to come. But MindsEye, by all intent and purposes, has been a massive failure and letdown, especially when measured by its original vision, a vision called Everywhere, a metaverse world that combines multiple games and game creation with community aspects together to build a super world. Or at least, it was supposed to. What went wrong with Everywhere and MindsEye, thought to be a separate thing and yet was set to be merely an extension of the former. Well, don't worry, we're gonna diagnose that and more reasons why MindsEye and thus far Build a Rocket Boy have been major failures. In this episode of Death of a Game, a series where we usually cover dead or dying games or companies and utilize a timeline of events to analyze their largest contributing factors. This episode is special though, because although MindsEye isn't dead yet, their company just served notice to 300 employees that they were at risk for redundancy, aka firing or let go. This is on top of the 90 other developers that are already bringing the IWGB union to sue them, and like the 200 others that were let go. And thus the chances of them being able to deliver on their original lofty vision, as you will see as the video unfolds, is almost nil. And so, why is that? The case begins for yet another Scottish video game developer legend with a golden touch not named David Jones, who was also involved in GTA, ironically being a founder of Rockstar North, of course the Rockstar studio located in Scotland. And this Scottish video game developer's attempt at proving his doubters and former friends wrong, seemingly at the expense of others. Let's get to the case. The story begins with the forming of Build a Rocket Boy as a studio located in Edinburgh, Scotland. This studio would be led by ex-Rockstar developers, but not just any Rockstar developers. One of them would be none other than Leslie Benzies, a Scottish video game developer, who was a large part, according to reports from Rockstar themselves, for pushing GTA 3 and the following GTA titles before GTA 5 to stardom and success. Leslie was a force. When he was in the room, you knew about it. And that's why the Hauser brothers would ask for his help when development on GTA 3 seemed to kinda be at a bit of a standstill. But Leslie was problematic for the team at Rockstar too, at least according to some sources. He was talented and well-liked, but had a tendency to rest on his laurels a bit and make some hasty decisions. In contrast, the Hausers were also called problematic, especially Dan, who was kind of reportedly a bit of a diva. What happened next was Leslie was of the belief that online was the future for Rockstar and for GTA, and he wanted to lean into GTA Online and things that were close to that, like GTA 4's online modes. According to the dispute sources though, the Hausers were in a major disagreement at the time with him and still believe that the series should focus foremost on being a single-player game, but according to another, deeper and more embarrassing source and reason, the real reason was because Leslie put his name in the prime position in the credits for GTA Online, a position that was usually taken by Sam Hauser, who was the president and co-founder of the company. This was seen by Sam as Benzies wanting to, quote, take over the company. and created serious friction. While we don't know all of what happened in terms of specifics, apparently after this, Leslie was asked to sign a contract meant to signify his new executive position and the perks that would come with it. According to Leslie, this was something done at the last second when Rawan Hajjaj, a senior executive that I just butchered his name at Rockstar, would fly to Scotland, Binzie's home residence, to have him sign documents related to profit sharing. However, according to Binzie's later on, of which a lawsuit would then spawn, this contract was supposed to give Binzie's profit sharing and instead had language designed in a way meant to avoid this profit sharing. Following this, Leslie would be advised to take a sabbatical, taking a few months to half a year to recollect thoughts and feelings, and start at a later date again. But when Leslie would return to Rockstar North offices in Scotland, he was ordered off the premises and ultimately terminated. Rockstar would later claim that Binzie's was a subpar employee according to the lawsuit, while publicly thanking him for his time and claiming the opposite there. It's hard to know where the truth lies, of course, with this kind of corporate speak, but we know that the dispute wasn't going to end there. Leslie, after raising a lawsuit against his former employee, would suffer a setback when the court would actually deem that the profit-sharing promises were dubious. But Leslie was full steam ahead with forming his own company regardless, which had been quietly working on a number of projects since 2016. Leslie had no difficulties in securing funding at $151 million over 3 rounds of funding, in which his new company, Build a Rocket Boy, would balloon up to a total of 400 employees. Reportedly, according to Aberdeen The City, in their reporting, Barb would spend around $7.1 million in yearly operational costs. The rest of the money was likely going to go towards, of course, pursuing a project of their choice. The drama wouldn't end yet, however, and a number of Rockstar employees would express that crunch was the norm at Rockstar, with some developers having put in 100 hours a week. And I've heard part of this crunch is actually made worse by the fact that they hire lower-end developers, pay them less, and then promise them money whenever the games come out, so you have to stick through the entire process. Something Rockstar had the ability to do, with how popular they had become with GTA 5 having sold 220 million copies. The reports of crunch were during the development of Red Dead Redemption 2 specifically, a game that would drop in 2018 and sell another 78 million copies. Rockstar had grown to a gargantuan size and was only continuing to grow, but with the departure of Leslie and other developers for the first time in a minute, Rockstar was losing some of their big talent. You might say this is disputable, but remember Leslie wanted to go in on GTA Online, something that Take-Two, the publisher behind Rockstar, would do anyway, regardless if the Housers apparently wanted it or not, and would be met with tremendous success. GTA Online has since generated billions, like billions. So regardless if reports about Leslie's prowess were understated or overstated or whatever, he clearly was on to something, and this created the perfect storm of many fan hopefuls such as myself awaiting the next Scottish video game developer's project. Take-Two would return the favor with Binzie's and take him to court after accusing him of poaching some of their employees. This would end in a confidential settlement that would also force Binzie's new company to change name, having previously been named the Royal Circus Games. This lengthy drama would continue both behind the scenes and legally. And who was right? It's hard to say, and hard to tell from the outside, of course, even with reports on both sides. Was Leslie or Take-Two bitter about things? Probably. But if both felt that they had proper cases to bring against each other, they were in their rights to do such. America. But this drama wasn't going to help Leslie and co move on or exit the giant shadow that Rockstar Games could cast, and was casting, at any moment. With the departure of none other than another founder of Rockstar, and often credited as the guy behind the GTA series creatively, from a story and narrative perspective, Dan Houser, the vice president and co-founder of Rockstar, Sam Houser's brother, would depart the company. More rumblings of more disagreements, this time between brothers, where reportedly Dan wanted to make more frequent games and Sam wanted to focus on the bigger blockbusters. This feud likely extended past that, such as rumors of Dan being hard to work with, but this is the only part we really know about so far. Rockstar was clearly suffering from some growing pains, when only just a few of its founding major members were now left, and Sam, the president of the company, seemingly was behind yet another departure. Interesting. This is relevant because it furthers the story of Leslie Binzie's and his departure, showing that clearly something serious was at play behind the scenes, and possibly coming from Sam's direction primarily. But we're not going to focus any more energy on Rockstar anymore, and instead we'll focus on our main antagonist or main protagonist developer, Build a Rocket Boy. While development would originally start in 2016 for what was to become their first project, due to likely unsatisfactory results with the Lumberyard engine, which was the engine that they would choose, an engine purchased and flipped by Amazon Game Studios that has yet to see much success, including with AGS, and is routinely called out as an issue in development whenever working on these games, including with, of course, the biggest project that it's known for, New World. Build a Rocket Boy would then shift to Unreal Engine 5 sometime on November 13th, 2020. While this would likely solve many of their issues, Unreal Engine 4 and 5 have a pattern of turning their games into a bit of like copycat clones of each other, utilizing some of the same presets and such. It would be up to Build a Rocket Boy to break those conventions though and make a worthwhile project following a major engine change. The first time we would see Build a Rocket Boy with their first project publicly was August 2022, where they would announce Everywhere, a game that was set to seamlessly blend gameplay, adventure, creativity, and discovery. A true sandbox experience with a quality graphical and gameplay package to boot. Think Roblox and then some. Everywhere could create games within the game, and worlds within the world. It was a metaverse or virtual world. This was not just one game, it was a game platform for creation. Something about the talented executives and founders at Rockstar Games, or at least the X-ones now, had this certain fire for always reaching for the stars. With David Jones, an iconic programmer, most famously being behind Crackdown and APB post his time at Rockstar and on GTA 2. The legacy of these Scottish developers was immense, but sometimes your own hype and Kool-Aid drinking can make you feel like you just can't fail. Which could also be why we've seen such spectacularly ambitious failures on the channel, like Lawbreakers with Cliff Bleszinski, or of course APB with David Jones, like we just mentioned, another title that I've covered on the Death of a Game show. The alpha test for Everywhere would take place December 2023 quietly, with me being unable to find any reports or rumblings concerning such. Build a Rocket Boy wanted to make sure they kept their testing under wraps, whether because of public perception being too harsh or things just not being ready yet. Sometimes when you secure funding for a company, it depends on what kind of funding you end up securing and the terms and conditions that would come with such, for how and how long you have to repay such funding. Or perhaps they come with major expectations of turning a profit at a certain point or seeing something more concrete. The point I'm making is that while Leslie Benzies was able to secure a lot of funding, the funding would already start drying out after like 8 years now, and layoffs would hit the company sometime in February of 2024. The Builder's Beta, as it was dubbed, a test run of not just a set of development tools, but the ability to play them out in a live game, would drop June 2024. But even as interesting as this idea might sound on paper, or, through your ears, confusion set in early, as you can see in the comments. MindsEye was actually announced at the end of the Everywhere trailer, originally meant to be a game within Everywhere, and fans were curious more about the status of that game. I think that's because Everywhere was being sold as kind of like, hey, you're gonna make a game for us, and that's a bit hard to sell to people, whereas like MindsEye was like more high fidelity graphics, and it made people feel like it was more of like Minecraft on steroids, at least because of that was like possible on the engine or whatever. That game would be announced separately, perhaps due to demand, October 2024, looking like a blend of an action movie and a sci-fi game. MindsEye looked to be an action-adventure thriller with parts of like GTA with a focus on driving and shooting and, of course, other parts, and the other parts of like Deus Ex, as your characters seem to like feature cybernetic powers and the moral dilemmas that come with such. But when you break the trailers down, including the gameplay reveal, what is shown is just flashy, sure, and it has a nice package, sorry, but it already feels like it's lacking some depth early on. It has a total lack of showcasing key gameplay features that would then set the game apart. It looked like just a narrative-focused shooter, but if the idea was to have this game be a part of the ever-expanding Everywhere game and world, it was going to have to be a lot more than just a narrative shooter with okay gameplay. Not with that kind of expectation that was being put onto them, and how much money was on the line as well. For reference, Alan Wake 2, a comparable narrative shooter of a sort, had $81 million as its budget. By this point, Barb had been spending around $50 million on just their operational costs over the course of 7 years. That leaves around $100 million left over for the budget of their game, but part of that budget had to be used for marketing, something that would cost anywhere between $10 to $30 million for a major game or company. Meaning they had a budget that was comparable to Alan Wake 2, a pure narrative shooter action-adventure game, while trying to be like Roblox, a metaverse, and so much more. The math just wasn't adding up even before launch. But following a poor reception for MindsEye's reveal at large, CEO Mark Gerhard, which might sound familiar to some RuneScapians, a former longtime CEO at Jagex, another British video game developer, of course, behind RuneScape like I've already said, would claim that the bad press was actually like a paid concerted effort. This is one of the most bizarre things I've seen claimed in gaming, but I'm gonna split a little bit of hairs here. Gerhard has probably been told stories by ex-Rockstar employees that are now working at the company at Barb of supposed strip club-infused work environments, and likely saw Rockstar's actions post the departures as pretty vindictive, so basically Gerhard felt like this was just another part of that. But the hard part with criticism is that you have to be able to parse through the bad criticism. The criticism that isn't constructive and doesn't lead to improvement, while looking for the good criticism at the same time. But while Leslie could have chosen to make a humble game post his time at Rockstar before building into something more grandeur, Leslie, when interviewed before launch, would take no opportunities to kill hype, and instead would just stoke the flames, claiming that MindsEye wasn't just a one-and-done game experience and was set to be ever-evolving, like a virtual world. MindsEye would state that MindsEye would find support through Play MindsEye, which was the play portion of the game, with continuous content, an upcoming multiplayer, and the ability to utilize the building tools shown in everywhere to build more stories and expand the game even further. It was now beginning to sound like the game was like Destiny and Minecraft mixed together, an incredibly high bar to reach that hasn't been reached yet. But in the same vein, claimed that the main campaign was only 20 hours long, and according to most reports I've seen, that's like double the amount. I mean, no wonder this guy was so talented. He managed to say all of that impressive stuff before dropping the bomb that their game would cost full price and yet be faster to beat than games that I played when I was like 11. Kidding. But seriously, MindsEye was built and sold on a promise. A promise that eventually it would be worth the value arrangement. Pinky promise. It felt like Leslie and co. were treating their customer base like an investor, trying to convince them that nothing was wrong, and that they were worthy of an investment further. Something that you don't really want to feel when you're playing and buying a game. A bad omen would strike right just before the launch of MindsEye, which was set for June of 2025 with the departure of two major executives from Build a Rocket Boy. The chief financial and legal officers had departed, and while this could be a coincidence, the likeliness that these two positions in particular related to each other and related to likely why MindsEye was being rushed in the first place, set to launch before Everywhere, the platform it was supposedly built on. I mean, just come on. That meant that finances and legal positions were looking choppy for Build a Rocket Boy, and there was a ton riding on their upcoming launch. That's not a there's smoke, there's fire, that's there's already a fire. And MindsEye would launch across platforms June 10th, 2025, and what was originally described as a genre-creating action-adventure shooter with a massive sandbox toolkit to boot was like merely just a piece of that dream. On aggregate review website Metacritic, MindsEye would score a staggeringly low score of 37 out of 100 from critics and 2.5 out of 10 from players. The Guardian would score the game the same as IGN, a 40 out of 100, stating that MindsEye is an oddity. For all its failings, I really disliked playing it, and yet it's also difficult to sincerely recommend. Its ideas, its moment-to-moment action and narrative are so thinly conceived that it barely exists, and yet, I'm kind of happy that it does. IGN, scoring it the same, would claim that when its performance is stable and you're explosively blasting your way through robots, MindsEye can masquerade as a serviceable action shooter for a few minutes at a time. Its near-future setting and driving feel also impress, however its flashy graphics and cinematics can't otherwise hide its distinct lack of substance. For me, that sounds like the rank-and-file developers were doing their job, but whoever was in charge of things was not putting the focus in the right places and thus creating the right direction for the rest of the team to follow. I mean, Digital Foundry was calling the game's performance abject, even after the latest patch that was meant to fix those issues at launch. I mean, MindsEye, where to start? You have a generic shooter meant to signal the coming of an age of new technology and innovations, yet it feels completely dated, like a generic story shooter that you played back in 2011. Bland gameplay, a far too linear story for a supposed open world game, and a forgettable story overall make Leslie Benzies' new game a total dud. Not even the cool gadgets like the drones in the game that you can use to oversee fights and assist you, or quality driving that the game does have, can save anything here either. The story doesn't stop there either, and the plot only continues to thicken like my grandma's oatmeal. Miss you, Grandma. Build a Rocket Boy reportedly was working on another game during and after the launch of MindsEye, their most recent game, an extension of Everywhere, and this project wasn't Everywhere. It was reportedly a project based on a seriously powerful IP from a big company. Leslie had, clearly at least, a knack for getting attention, able to secure such powerful projects despite much of anything to show for. But it also further shows that MindsEye itself seemed to be a mere extension of more ambitious ideas pushed to launch, in my opinion, to make money and convince investors that things were being done. which has been basically confirmed by sources saying that Leslie was the one that was behind pushing the game to launch, including pushing everywhere as well. But eventually money was going to dry up, and so was the patience, and these people with big money were going to stop believing in Barb, especially as they just massively faltered with MindsEye. Build a Rocket Boy within just a few weeks would already announce major layoffs after getting critically reamed, reportedly affecting up to 100 employees, with as many as 300 employees being notified about possible redundancies. This is the issue with reaching for the stars, before your company's even made consistent revenue, or any revenue. Depending on the type of funding, they might not be willing to see you out as much as you might think or feel like they should, especially when you haven't launched a product that made money since the beginning of development. That was almost like 10 years ago. Especially when their publisher, IO Interactive, a Danish developer and publisher, was likely not happy with their results and was pulling the plug on their end of things too. Even the lead actor behind the main character, Jacob Diaz, and MindsEye, Alex Hernandez, who also played the main character in Mafia 3 and faced some scrutiny there too, unfortunately, would share his frustration at the end of the game's launch month, claiming that he didn't understand why they would launch something if it wasn't ready, and the natural frustration of being a part of another game failure, of course, too. But to be fair with Mafia 3, at least it actually has like a good container. There's something enjoyable there beside like the needless grind that it has, whereas MindsEye feels worse than that game did by far. The public reception would continue to match this with a Steam reception of 42% positive and less than 4,000 Steam players. MindsEye wasn't just bad, it was a total flop, and being called by the Washington Post more than the worst game of the year, it was being called a disaster piece. Even IO Interactive, who had stayed rather quiet throughout all of this as MindsEye's publisher, would express their discontent, and even remark that the failure made them apprehensive to even enter the space as a publisher again, period. Ouch. Hell, even the BBC was reporting on things, and no, not that BBC, and telling the world more behind the scenes, such as Leslie notifying his staff that they would get the game back on track, and that the negativity around it was just uncalled for. Then would pivot to state that internal and external forces were working against the game's launch. But according to BBC and public filings, Barb had attracted as much as $300 million investment by 2024, but in the prior 4 years alone had totaled at losses of $202 million, burning through money at a far greater rate than my previous projections. As many of us know, due to early reveals, MindsEye was originally set to be a game within Everywhere, but apparently according to reports, as I've already stated, Everywhere was actually something interesting and special, but was rushed by Leslie directly, and then had most of its focus shifted to MindsEye instead, something that would plague the project throughout. According to 93 current and former Barb employees at the time, likely a part of those that were directly let go, studio management made radical changes without properly consulting the workers that were actually doing the work, and it sounded like leaders didn't let the professionals just be the professionals that they hired, and would also ignore feedback. Leslie was apparently also a classic manager and was unleashed when working on the project, micromanaging all of those around him, which you can actually see in a journal MindsEye uploaded themselves.
This is what we do. We play it. There's usually somebody in there who will take tickets. Chris, you got a ticket about the fire extinguisher. Did you get the raindrops over here? We'll record the videos, we'll take little chunks out, and then that'll get put into the Jira database, and that'll get sent out to devs to fix.
Workers were then forced to take an extra 8 hours of unpaid overtime for crunch periods, with many of these workers suffering from immense stress and pressure. According to the ex-employees, many expected the game would receive a negative reception at launch due to its health. Following this poor launch, nearly 300 employees would lose their job, with 93 of them putting out an open letter and then taking legal action against the company in response. It's only fair we try to dive through some of the developers who were working on MindsEye to see if they were the right fit for the job, or maybe management was right. You know, it's a good place to spot clues. The biggest red flags I could find was putting a college grad with nearly no experience in charge of game design and being the one behind the whole entire Everywhere engine, and then having an assistant being someone with almost no game development history. Like, sure, the team had talent. They had the GTA animations guy, a Sniper Elite major animation developer, the camera guy behind Ubisoft's hits, and more. But if your leadership is bad and not giving good direction, it doesn't matter how much talent you have, especially when you're rushing to get things done, and you can't just throw money at creativity and force a solution past a point. Not really, at least. I mean, David Jones, as we've talked about before, also learned that the hard way with APB. You have to give time for creativity to take hold and foster it with good leadership. While I can be critical of dev teams put in poor positions to succeed, MindsEye seemed like they had plenty of talent, but the leadership made the wrong plays, and even in some cases sabotaged their work, making things absolutely subpar in the process. Barb would respond to the massive backlash an ex-employee in a public response with a response of their own. Parting ways with people is never easy, and we were deeply saddened to make that decision. We didn't anticipate having to make redundancies after launch, but we approached the process with care and transparency, meeting all of our obligations. We're listening closely to feedback from former employees and are committed to learning and growing from it. Something that basically just amounts to a sob story about how they're sad and how they were going to work on it in the future. But what about the people they let go? Anyway, I'm sure they were sad too. But I did find something interesting. A clue, perhaps. Meeting all of our obligations. That's an interesting thing to say, and it sounds like legal related, perhaps related to their funding. Maybe the steelman here is that MindsEye was pushed to launch due to the funds drying up, but even then, that's still a problem of management, and allowing things to stack so high they all come crashing down like a deck of cards. Regardless of why, things would continue to get weirder. Like a Stranger Things episode. Next thing you know, Eleven is just gonna pop through somewhere running around. Anyway, Arcadia would be introduced October 30th, 2025. And what was Arcadia? Honestly, I can't really explain it that well. It seemed like it was everywhere with a different name and maybe expectation, now just the engine itself, but you had to buy MindsEye to still have access to it? The whole thing was bewildering and felt like they were trying to sell off the technology they no longer had focused on after launching MindsEye. But at this point, it felt like desperation. Something you could hear at the end of the trailer when the voices are echoing is, "Play my games, all I'm asking." No, I'm being serious. It actually plays that, and that's about as on the nose as you can possibly get.
Play my games, all I'm asking.
But this is a game that has sold less than 30,000 copies reportedly, and no amount of robotic voice begging is going to make people play your game. And sure, maybe Arcadia could have done that if people had any idea what it was, and it didn't feel like paltry content or a token given to players when the full vision of MindsEye just didn't work out. And not just not work out, but crash in a bale of fire. Why not just separate it as its own engine or spin it off or something and try to build your games and popularity from there? Well, that takes time and money, and they're also using the Unreal Engine, and the money was already running out before launch. Arcadia, MindsEye, and the whole metaverse idea pushed by Leslie Benzies and the other executives in tow was confusing, and it was never fully realized. Instead, we got a subpar game and promises of a world yet to come. I like this quote I got from Raph Koster when I was speaking to him personally, one of the founding fathers of the virtual world industry, or metaverses before they were even named that. And that's, in order to make a metaverse, or virtual world, as they are more so known, you have to make a good game. That's the first place to start. You can't just expect people to do that for you. Minecraft didn't work that way, Rust didn't work that way, and neither did Roblox, and so many more examples. They had their own games, and then they got expanded on heavily, sure, both officially and unofficially, in ways by the community that we've never seen before. MindsEye on its own wasn't a good traditional shooter or even a narrative shooter like Alpha Protocol or Alan Wake or even games like Resident Evil, and thus even if its world-building tools were impressive, it was just going to struggle to ever make that jump to popularity and play. Be wary of anyone advertising a metaverse too, or a world of creativity, community, and gaming all included. Those are hard things to promise, and in order to do such you have to prove your game's fun and works in the first place. Hytale, for example, is back, and Simon is moving and shifting things around. And that might be an example of how to properly do this, even after their major stumble I covered in the series as well. But Leslie Benzies and crew? We have another story of a talented artist feeling like they could do no wrong, like we covered with the talented Cliff Bleszinski. And of course, you have the John Romero and Daikatana stories and many more examples. Talent stays talent by keeping their head to the grindstone, and keeping their talent honed. The more disconnected they get from whatever their success was or whatever gave them success, and out of touch with the modern scene of gaming as it continues to age, the more chances you see massive failures like this one. It's sad for me because I bleed black, and I love David Jones as a Scottish developer as well. But with Leslie, David, and more, we have talented guys who had a lot more on their mind than just being standard successes. And this probably led to their massive successes in the past, and also massive blunders all the same. The music is playing, though Detectives, in this case, as interesting and twisty-turny as it's been, has come to an end. Well, mostly. Sure, MindsEye is still kicking, but considering how much money was on the line for that game and how little has been recouped, it's not likely we're going to see a comeback from MindsEye or Barb. And so, how did MindsEye become one of our greatest modern gaming failures? Lumberyard complicated development and added crunch. UE5 slop that's overly flashy with not much depth. They shot for the stars and landed in the bargain bin. Poor management and crunch culture and a bad work environment. Leslie Benzies was just on the loose. A lack of a strong direction. They ran out of the investment funding while mid-flight. The story of another major developer and executive known for a major franchise failing to wow the audience they were so used to wowing is done. MindsEye might be a totally forgettable game, and rightfully so, but it won't be forgettable as a story and extension the story and tribulations of Build a Rocket Boy. And hopefully I've done my part to help tell that story, detectives, until the next case. A case that will cover another legendary developer we've already covered before. One famous for making really fun games that failed to impress initially because of bugs and stuff like that, and then paradoxically can't stand the test of time. Thanks for watching.
One where I, Paul Atreides, was never born.